Okay, welcome everybody to the next episode of the Academy of Management's Origin series. I'm excited to be part of this renewed season as we ramp up again with interviewing authors of some of the sort of cutting edge ideas that are being put out there in Academy of Management Review. And this paper that we're going to discuss today, as I was reflecting on it, has it all. It's got really good examples. It's got multiple kinds of theorizing. It's got some cross-disciplinary incorporation of ideas from other disciplines, and really tackles something I think most of us see often and almost all the time, but maybe don't pay as much attention to it as we might have liked. So the paper's title is Getting Away with It or Not, the Social Control of Organizational Deviance. And to talk about this paper, we've got the three co-authors with us, Alessandro Piazza, Patrick Bergemann, and Wesley Helms. And so I'm going to just start off just by asking the three of you to briefly introduce yourselves and correct any of my mistaken pronunciations, if that's the case. And then we'll get into some of what this paper is about and the backstory to writing this paper. So Alessandro, let's start with you.
All right. Thank you, Greg. So my name is Alessandro Piazza. I am currently an assistant professor of strategy at the Jones School of Business at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Broadly, my work is in organizational theory, where I have looked at topics like social evaluations, stigma, social control, and social movements.
Awesome. Thank you. What about you, Patrick?
My name is Patrick Bergman. I'm an assistant professor in organization and management at the University of California, Irvine. And my research, it kind of is at the border or the cross linkages between organizational theory and sociology. And my main topic of focus is whistleblowing and social control.
Thank you. Awesome. Wes, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Wes Helms. I am an associate professor of strategic management at Brock University within the Goodman School of Business. My research is definitely OT and sort of focused upon stigma and largely how marginalized populations strategize to succeed.
Awesome, thank you. So before we dive into the paper, and I ask for a little bit of an essence of what the paper's about, tell us about the connection between the three of you. You're obviously in different parts of the country at this point in time. What's the backstory to how you connected?
I think I was the social connector here, wasn't I? Yeah. So I think I have been active in sort of the stigma and misconduct space for a while now. And actually, Wes and I met, I think, within the context of the stigma PDW at AOM in what we maybe now a decade ago, I want to say, anyway, a very long time. Whereas Patrick and I met when we were both at Columbia, I as a doctoral student and Patrick doing a postdoc.
Also almost a decade ago.
Also almost a decade ago, boys. So, yeah, so I think this was born out of conversations that we had over the years. And probably also like a little bit of frustration that I had with the kind of mantra that is often given in Silicon Valley of like, move fast and break things, right? That it is often given as something you must do, really, right? Whereas my stance was always, well, if you do, very bad things can happen to you or not, right? Or sometimes good things can happen. And so I think that was in many ways the rationale that brought us to explore this specific topic, at least on my end of things.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to recognize that, number one, Academy of Management conferences and the people we meet can often lead to fruitful things, even if it's quite a long way down the line. And just to, I think you're tackling a very, very interesting topic here. So just a reminder to our listeners, the title of the paper is Getting Away with It or Not, in parentheses, the social control of organizational deviance. So there's quite a lot in that title. getting away with it or not, which you've sort of started to allude to, Alessandro. And then you use this term social control of organizational deviance, which is sort of drawing on a long, rich literature. So give us a little bit of a sense of just what this paper is about at a high level, without going through all the nuanced detail, but just at a high level, what the paper's about.
Do you guys want to give it a shot, or should I?
And go ahead.
Alessandro,
All
go
right,
for it.
fine. So I guess, we know that organizations routinely break laws and norms, right? And often they are celebrated for doing so, right? So we kind of saw the headlines that were often in the press about Uber, right? Around Airbnb, and how they essentially like flouted kind of the existing like legal and normative environment, right? And so there is a sense that doing so can pay off, right? But at the same time, we know that this is ultimately deviant and counter-normative behavior, right? And so this tends to be often associated with, various social control agents like stepping in, like, government actors, competitors, regulators, and the like, and occasionally punishing organizations, if you will, right? So I guess what motivated me personally in thinking about this was, how can organizations, if you will, walk this tightrope, right, of kind of going beyond what the legal environment allows for, often trying to innovate and do new things in the process, right, while at the same time navigating the possibility they could be sanctioned, and sometimes even sanctioned out of existence, right? Shut down. To me, that is truly the essence of the paper. I don't know if you guys want to chime in and say more.
Well, I'd love to hear, just in terms of your own particular backgrounds, what are some of the connections between sort of the stuff you might have studied in the past, or the sort of disciplinary backgrounds that you come from, and how it infuses into this paper and how the questions become interesting.
I think each of us can speak to this, right? So because we all bring something to the paper. So in the past, I studied primarily stigma and scandals, right? And so, for example, I have studied the sex abuse scandal in the U.S. Catholic Church. I have studied the stigma targeting nuclear power. I have studied the stigma targeting abortion clinics more recently, right? And I feel I have brought all of these things to the paper. Wes and Patrick?
Well, it's okay if I go, Patrick?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. My background is very similar to Alessandro's. I studied practices that were considered deviant and succeeded otherwise in spite of it, in spite of being called illegal, in spite of being counter-normative and evil. Practices like mixed martial arts, and I just was I've always been fascinated as to how those processes sort of unveil themselves over time. And the other sort of thing that's really sort of become apparent is when I was an undergrad, I worked thinking maybe of going to law school within an attorney general's office, which profoundly shaped the way that I viewed the court system and the justice system in general, and their capacity to punish firms, and how and why they chose to punish firms. That deeply shaped my perspective, and has always shaped my perspective in organizational theory. Go for it, Patrick.
Sure. And for me, I would say the bulk of my work is focused on understanding responses to deviance. So, what happens when deviance occurs. And so, topics such as my work on whistleblowing, it's really looking at how do people respond, right? And so this project, this is a really interesting opportunity for me to keep thinking about these same topics, but also to expand more at the organizational level. So not individuals doing, enacting deviance in some way, but also organizations, and what that looks like theoretically.
Awesome. So it's sort of you've pulled together, or at least you've referred to in the answer to your prior question that certainly Alessandro and you, Wes, you've prior to this been embedded in or gotten sort of focused on sort of these specific instances of stigma, deviance, and how they might or might not be punished, whether it's mixed martial arts or the Catholic Church and so on. And now, what prompted you to sort of say, well, we need to step back and think about this across multiple different instances and abstract up to the level of writing theory, as opposed to going down and trying to understand these things at a more empirical or grounded in the data level? What was sort of the motivation for now saying, okay, it's time for an AMR paper or a conceptual paper on this topic?
I think on my end, the timing felt right because I felt, I had been tackling a number of empirical projects in this domain for a number of years when work began on this paper. And I actually, traced back in our shared folder and I saw that we began discussing this sometime in 2019. So, these processes, these papers have a little bit of a maturation period, if you will, right? So, but for me, writing theory, felt right, not only because I had never written an AMR piece before and I really wanted to give it a shot, but also because at that point, it was a way for me to try and go beyond like the specifics of the various empirical settings that I had looked at, which at that point were already quite varied, and kind of figure out like, well, can I really distill this, right, and turn it into something that is more structured, that kind of goes beyond the empirical setting, and that hopefully, other people can use then, irrespective of what their setting may be like.
So what did the process look like? It sounded, Alessandro, like you were the broker, and the sort of filling the structural hole, if you will, in this team. And what did it look like? Did you just reach out and say, "I think we should write a theory paper on this"? Were you throwing ideas around at a conference? I mean, what did the actual connection process look like that led to this then being a project that the three of you were working on?
You guys gotta help me out here because I'm not sure exactly how it started.
I do actually have a recollection of it. I mean, it was actually like the prior Boston. I mean, for my vantage point was Alessandro and I had lunch at Italy in Boston.
That's right.
And we kind of had a gripe session. We're just like, ultimately, like, like there's no theory that really takes a deviance perspective of it. And I think honestly, like, at least from my vantage point, because I think we all three of us like Donald Black's work. And I think that at least for me, that was the catalyst. It was like, oh, you've read Donald Black's work. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, so Donald Black is a legal scholar out of, I think, the University of Virginia, who has done a lot of work on social control, tends to treat it as a dependent variable, but just very different way of looking at social control at the individual level, because he talks about collectives and groups. And it was just, for me, that was the catalyst. That's my memory of when I got thinking about we needed, maybe write a theory paper on this.
The two very important things, I just want to double click on what you've said there, because I think they're important for our listeners. Number one, a gripe session with other scholars can often lead to useful insights, especially if you feel yourself getting worked up about this, if you get a sense there's something that's hasn't been worked out properly or doesn't make sense or hasn't had enough attention. I think paying attention to both those emotions and the insights that come from that kind of gripe session can be very valuable. And the second is uncovering someone else, often from another domain or writing in another area where there's some kind of it sort of speaks to you, and you find other people who that person's work speaks to, can often be, I think, quite a productive launching off point. And so I was obviously not aware of Donald Black's work or of your connection with it prior to this, but that does make a lot of sense to me. So very interesting.
And if
Patrick,
I may add to this,
yeah,
right,
go ahead.
Also, the importance of putting together a great team, because, I recall now that, as soon as, Wes and I had kind of zeroed in on the idea that this may take kind of a social control direction, I then seemed to recall that it was me who reached out to Patrick, right? Essentially thinking at the time, well, this is the sort of the best social control expert person that I know, right? And so if we really want to do this, then we're going to need someone like him on board. And so I think at that point, despite, having known each other for a very long time, we haven't really worked much together at all at that point. And so I just felt like, there was some complementary knowledge there that could really be leveraged to its maximum effect.
And Patrick, do you have is your background more of a sociology background? Did you do a PhD in sociology? Because it's evident that there's someone in this paper that knows the legacy of the literature here. You're going back to, I think, 1910 at one stage in the paper, and has built up this long sort of evolution of ideas around social control. It's Ross 1910 as well. And so is that your background?
Yeah, so my PhD is in sociology. And then for my own recollection of how I got involved, I mean, it's similar to what Alessandro said. We met at AOM. I forget what city we were in at the time, or what place we were. But it was wonderful because I was in the fortunate position I'd wanted to collaborate with Alessandro for a while, and he came to me not only wanting to collaborate, but with the question already formed. Right, he already had the question, and so of course, it was a natural fit with my interests as well. So it was very easy for me to say, yes, it's a really interesting question. It's with someone I want to work with, and that's kind of how I got involved.
And who would you, so just taking a step back, who would you say the primary audiences for this paper are? Who's the most likely sort of set of scholars to pick it up and run with it? Like what conversations or communities are you speaking primarily to?
I personally think this can be a fairly broad appeal to primarily, I think, within management and organizational theory, probably scholars of social evaluations, stigma, organizational misconduct, scandals. And then, Patrick can correct me here, but I can also see this having some degree of appeal within, folks in sort of sociology of organizations and deviance who may care about this particular kind of deviance and the way in which it's policed. There had been work on, deviance by organizations and social control of organizations, kind of like, especially in the 1970s and sort of sparsely afterwards, but it's never been something that has had a ton of traction, I feel.
Cool. I mean, the other thing I thought about in reading it, it's one of those papers, I think, where people will come with their own lens and see opportunity in it. And that's what we want in these kinds of papers. But as someone who studies sort of entrepreneurship and startups, I started thinking about, this paper inspires an understanding of sort of why in certain instances new ventures get competitive advantage from being deviant or are able to engineer new opportunities from being deviant. And I would expect that there will be a bunch of people in the entrepreneurship space that if they pick this up and read it, would inspire ideas for studying deviance as an advantage, appreciating who might do this, how they might do it in that startup space, because a lot of your salient examples relate back to startups, and it goes back to what you alluded to as the Silicon Valley sort of way of doing things: move fast and break things, just go ahead and do whatever it is. So
I mean, as you identified correctly, right? So entrepreneurship was a big inspiration for the paper. And it's no coincidence, right, that many of the examples that we actually draw on are either startups or fairly small companies, right? Because it's often them that end up doing the bulk of the type of deviance that we are interested in.
Yeah. So I want to ask about sort of maybe two or three aspects of the paper, and just the work that went in behind those aspects of the paper. The one is the utilization of examples, where you find them, how you use them, what that looked like, the back-end process to doing that. The second is sort of the notion of incorporating different kinds of theorizing, having both propositions and something that sort of represents a process model, and then these sort of pretty useful tables that might be thought of as at least outlaying something of a typology. And often as editors or so on, we're sort of saying to people, well, choose one and go with that, and yet you incorporate them. So I want to just ask about those things. So let's start with the examples, as we've alluded to, these very salient examples. You've already mentioned Uber, there's Airbnb, there's mixed martial arts, there's even more controversial ones, I think. I was trying to remember some of them. Smart gun manufacturers, Napster, Fininvest. So really, like jump off the page examples. What was the process for, number one, identifying them, number two, sort of uncovering the required information about them, and then number three, using them without making it an empirical paper?
Do you want to take a stab at this one, or shall I go ahead? I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
I feel like you two were really good about coming up with the examples, especially you, Wes.
Give us your take, Wes.
We within organizational theory, I would make the argument that there's a whole subset of organizations that we don't study and our eyes just don't naturally go to because of the lens that we use. When you're thinking about legitimacy, or you're thinking about institutionalization, and you're not thinking about these other organizations that can have large societal impacts initially and can all of a sudden appear to grow out of nowhere. So I think the reality is that there wasn't a substantial theoretical base in the social control of organizations in order to drive a lot of this home. I mean, we had to we had to sort of go out and take a look at these unique examples. And the reality is I do have a bunch of folder of and a document filled with organizations I think are just neat and would be interesting to study. So that was, from my vantage point, that was one of the easier aspects and one of the neat things, because I didn't know that in writing the paper beforehand, that we could draw so closely from these examples in order to generate theory. And I think that's a little bit unique about our paper.
I can say two things about the examples too, which is, one thing is the examples are fun, right? They make for good writing. And if deployed correctly, I think they can help kind of keep the reader hooked to the page, right? And so they do that, hopefully. And on the other hand, I also think theory, especially pure theory, often risks being a little dry, right? So that it's not immediately self-evident why one needs the theory or what the theory is for. And so, by drawing on a fairly varied set of examples, you can actually show the reader, look, this is actually something that can help, explain things that you may have heard about or things that you maybe read in the media or what have you, right? So in terms of the process that kind of went on sort of behind the scenes, right? As I theorized, I kind of looked for examples, right? Either things that I saw in the media or things that I looked up on the internet that I thought might fit. And in turn, I think the examples like help sort of spark new conversations, right? And sort of at times even take the theory in directions that we had not originally envisioned. I will also say not all the examples we collected ended up making it into the paper. So the paper actually has some fairly outrageous examples, but we actually left some out that we could have put in and did it.
So some of the examples you've got in your secret folder, Wes, are even more extreme than the ones you refer to here.
No, I mean,
it's not just my secret folder. It's all our secret folder.
We had a classic example of rule breaking, which I don't think made it into the final paper. And it's basically this Utah-based startup that essentially sold human breast milk, right? Which a lot of people say just like, oh, it's icky, but it's not illegal to sell, right? Eventually, it was discovered that the breast milk was sourced from women in Cambodia. And so then it got shut down.
Yeah. Mm.
But so that is like one of the examples that I think didn't make it into the paper in the end, but we had it in the back burner.
Yeah.
And then if I could just build on the usefulness of the examples. For me, one thing, it really helped to have this whole set of examples because it was a great way to check the theory that we were coming up with. We come up with a theory, but then if that couldn't explain half the examples we had, then maybe the theory wasn't comprehensive enough. And so I found that really helpful to kind of for the back and forth between the theorizing and the examples.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, we're organizational and management scholars, and so we're trying to explain and account for pragmatic things out in the world. And if the theory we're developing doesn't account for or explain those, then we're not really doing our job. And so that back and forth does seem very valuable. And in the end, going to the point Alessandro started with, it makes for good writing and enjoyable reading. And so all of that, it's just a good example of using examples effectively. What about the notion that there's sort of quite a lot going on with the theorizing here? There's the figure one sort of left to right process model. There's then propositions that are accounting for certain relationships in that process model. And there's the table, I think it's table 2 and table 3, almost like topologies of different forms of social control and different outcomes from social control. Which one of those did you start with, and then how did they begin to incorporate with each other? You may not even remember, but what you can remember, I think, will be helpful.
So, in fact, to prepare for this conversation, I actually went back to the original draft that we submitted all the way back in 2021, right? And so, that made me realize, how indebted we are to the editor and to the reviewers and the suggestions they made over time, right? Because in the original submission, we actually had a table of examples that is pretty similar to the one that ended up in the final version. And we have kind of a bare bones like theory framework that isn't really a process model, because we haven't really, at the time, we had not really fleshed out many of the core pieces around separating the form of social control from the outcomes and having the distinctions between cooperativeness and formality on the one hand, and accommodation and permanence on the other. So those were things that were ultimately developed after getting feedback from the editor and the reviewers, especially in the first round, where, basically they made us realize that, maybe we were onto something, but we were not quite there yet. And so actually, just in terms of the mere figures and the table, there's day and night between the original submission and the paper that ended up getting accepted in the end.
I would add, though, the initial submission had hypotheses.
It did.
When we resubmitted, we took out the hypotheses and we focused on a process model.
That's right, yeah.
And then the final submission just jammed it all together. And so that's why you see process and hypotheses all together.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
It works pretty well. It works well, in my opinion. And it's a good example of saying these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. In fact, they can support each other quite well if you can build it up appropriately. And I think this will be an exemplar of a paper that can do that. So well done. And then the table 2 and table 3 are really explaining pieces within that have got some dimensionality to them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, because basically the process model, right? So in those boxes that say form of social control and outcomes, right? So those are really the dimensions, right? According to which you can classify forms and outcomes. But that actually tells you nothing about those, what those actually look like in practice, right? So the tables were added so that people could actually see, look, this is not just something abstract that we came up with. Like, there are actual things that can happen that map onto these things.
Yeah. So for the sake of our listeners, so if you've got low cooperativeness and low formality, you're in the space of a boycott. Mm-hmm. If you then shift to higher levels of formality, you're in the space of a unilateral or a legislative action where someone's just imposing, and low cooperativeness. And then if you go onto the high, you're in this notion of participatory rulemaking, and then you've got a variance between those. So it's a 3x3 matrix on those two dimensions, and something similar on the outcome side. So very interesting use of sort of typologizing different variants of both the forms of social control and the outcomes from social control.
Yeah, indeed.
Which makes it pretty complex. Did you find it difficult to write everything within the sort of constraints of what are the norms without deviating from too many norms of an AMR article? To what extent did you have to sort of go through pain of cutting things out or condensing things in editing down this work to fit in with those norms?
There was a lot. It was a lot of.
So Wes, we want to know about. So just talk us. I mean, even if it's just saying it's a lot, like that's actually useful for people.
What was useful? I'm sorry, Alessandro. What was from, what I need to do is I need to put the onus on Patrick and Alessandro for the confidence in which they basically took our initial work and broke it down and reassembled it in really a remarkable way. I mean, like, this was not we were not conservative, and I was probably the one that was asking us to be more conservative with the process, because both the process model as well as changing the forms and the integration of the two all of it was basically reconstructed. I mean, I'll be honest, like the last round we submitted was a very different paper than the second round. And
So
took
you
it
actually
really-
went through essentially breaking it down and reassembling it in order to meet expectations, deliver something that was sort of in compliance with what people were asking for.
and it was new. It was largely Patrick and Alessandro coming with like really new concepts, and that was new to the paper as well as new theoretically. And the third round, I kind of was watching in fear and awe as they took the lead and really delivered an incredible process model.
It was also difficult because, at various parts through the review process, right, we got feedback from the editor along the lines of, you are still trying to do too much, right? And so this is something that I think, many papers, if not most, go through, right? You have this kind of like big thing, this cathedral in your head, and then you have to make it fit within the confines of a 35-page paper, and you realize that you just can't do everything, right? So in our case, I think we had a lot of ideas, for example, on the conditions under which social control agents are activated versus not. And all that stuff never made it into the paper because there was simply no room for it, right? So we had to basically start the model by assuming that, social control agents would do something and then kind of figure out, what would happen from there, but we couldn't do the previous part, within the confines of the paper. I see, writing theory, especially after the first draft, as like sculpture, right? Where you start from like a block of marble, and then theory is crafted not by adding, but by actually taking stuff out, right? And that is how the statue is made. I have always believed that what you take out is more important than figuring out what to put in, almost. In fact,
that is a very useful, pertinent analogy, because I think a lot of times you need to take stuff away in order to make sure that the essence and the salience and the nuance of what you're trying to say comes out. And you still manage to leave quite a lot in. One of the things you did very well, which I think is worth just noting for other people wanting to learn from this, is I think, and this probably comes from having to cut stuff out, is you're very clear up front on some of the key assumptions of what are you theorizing about and what are you excluding from your theorizing, and specifying this is included, but these other notions of self-control and these other things that are more covert as opposed to overt or just excluded, because and so you at least carve out some of the stuff that you're not going to tackle, which allows you to spend more time focused on the things that are actually central to your theorizing. So I think that's one of the almost tactical things, practical tactical things that needs to happen in order to get something that's this grand down to a reasonably digestible article length piece of work. So
that is absolutely right.
Yeah.
And in fact, we became very mindful of it because, again, we had these things which we wanted to put in and couldn't. And so we kind of figured out, well, we have to explain clearly to the reader why we are not doing this, right? Because people have all sorts of priors coming into the paper. So let us tell you why we are going here and not there.
Makes a ton of sense. So I've got two last questions I want to ask. The first, and I think we can just, for both of these, circle around the group, if you don't mind. So the first is, what impact do you hope this paper will have? Like, what would be the outcome you would hope to see? And it could be pragmatic outcome, it could be a theoretical outcome, it could be a policy outcome. What would you love to see come from this work? And then secondly, what have you learned from going through this process of conceptualizing an AMR paper, going through the review? And I want you to sort of think about the notion that you've got a PhD student that comes to you and thinks they've got a good idea. They're going to try and write it or incorporate it into an AMR paper. What would be the sort of one or two key tips you might give them based on what you've learned from this process? So let's start with where do you hope the impact for this paper will be? And we'll just go down the author list. So Alessandro, start with you, then Patrick, then Wes.
So my hope is that, and it's a lofty hope, right, to actually over time build a community of scholars who are people that broadly care about this, right, and care about deviance and care about, like, what happens to organizations that deviate, like, for good or bad, right? And so, on that note, we, the three of us with a colleague are doing a conference track at EGOS next year on this, and we are hoping that, more scholarly efforts will follow. I think, more importantly too, right, I hope this will bring more theoretical attention to social control in management studies, because, I often feel like the role of social control and social control agents is often obscured, right? So, we studied stigma, and we know that bad things often happen to stigmatized organizations, right? But they're not like struck by lightning. Someone is doing those things to them, right? And generally it's social control agents that do those things, right? So my hope is that this will bring some of that going forward. Did you also want the second question? Or
No. I'll come back for the second question. Give you all time to think about it. Patrick,
Sure.
what's your take on the paper's impact? Assuming Alessandro hasn't stolen all of your thunder.
So he did steal a lot of it. So I guess the two perspectives that I hope to build on, or I hope this paper builds on, is one, there's been a kind of burgeoning area of research in organizational wrongdoing, and there's just been a growing attention to that space, and just not nearly as much, and not much at all, to what happens in response. Yeah. And so, I've looked at that more at kind of micro level with whistleblowing on the individual, but I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for looking at social control of organizations and organizational deviance. And so I really hope other people, jump into this and really start building this space up. And then kind of from the sociology side, a lot of the work on social control and sociology is very, very much at the macro level. And this was done, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so I would love for that, this to help that area grow as well, and kind of return to a sociology of social control, but with more focus on individual actors, whether those are organizations or people, but how they're responding rather than this kind of high level macro perspective.
And I think social control is this interesting thing that there are some fundamental elements to social control that probably never change, but then there are almost evolving sort of mechanisms and evolving ways of communicating and technology that do change. And so there's this sort of more stable fundamental piece, but then there's a lot of change that's, I think, happens that something that might have driven social control 30 years ago no longer has any power, but something else has a whole lot of power. So as I was reading this, I was just thinking there is such richness in this notion of social control, which for the most part, we're looking over, we're ignoring. So I appreciate that you sort of allow it to re-emerge here and give it some airtime and some light. Wes, what about you?
I think just very similar to Alessandro and Patrick's comments. For me, as a scholar who was interested in stigma and determining the difference between stigma and sanctioning, and understanding that this role of it's not because the organization was stigmatized, it was because the organization was sanctioned and punished, why certain firms are punished. And I think that you're spot on in your assessment that there's a lot of richness here. For me, it's a social control agent, and whether or not a rule is enforced or not, because there's a lot of I think we can make an argument that rule enforcement doesn't happen that often. And so that may explain, certain changing dynamics where, the idea of why bad things happen is not simply, that because it's not bad or because these organizations legitimate themselves. It's because, they're negotiating and dealing with social control agents. So I think, this notion of having an alternative lens for explaining deviance, and perhaps one that's more deviance focused and attends to the strategies of how deviants succeed. And my own sort of take on it is I really like the social control lens and the idea of interactions with social control agents is explaining that and providing new theoretical insights based upon that.
Cool. And so let's go in the reverse direction now. So Wes, I'm going to go back to you so that we put Alessandro under all the pressure this time around. What did you learn from this project? What advice might you give to someone else wanting to tackle writing a fairly ambitious conceptual piece?
This for me was all about the co-authors. We had the right team. We had shared interests and you have to you have to be honest about what you don't know, and you have to build a team around you of those scholars with skills that you don't have and knowledge that you don't have, and to enable it. I mean, this is really this is a team effort I think I've been out longer than both of you guys by probably 5 years. And I learned just a tremendous amount from working with these individuals about writing theory. So honestly, for me, it was a really social, collaborative experience, and learning to trust, and collaborate with people that have similar interests but diverse skills than you do. So I'm just appreciative of Alessandro and Patrick.
Cool.
And this process.
Yeah, that's great. Patrick, what about you?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, start with a really interesting question. I mean, I think that got us so far in this project. And it just, these things take years to, from start to finish. And it really, I think, kept us all engaged, just having this really interesting kind of tangible question to be working with. And then the second thing, so I showed a draft for feedback before we submitted for the first time, and the feedback, this person had one main piece of I guess criticism or feedback on the paper, and it was we had this really great framework and question and introduction, and we built up the literature, but at least at that point in time, that version, the hypothesis that the second half of the paper didn't live up to the promise of the first half. And I think it's really hard when writing theory to not rehash old explanations for things, even if you're putting them into a new context. And not come up with something that's kind of obvious. And so, if I was talking to a PhD student, I'd really push them to get to the point in their theorization where they're at something where they say, what, this is a new perspective, or this feels different than borrowing kind of the obvious explanations. And it took us a while to get there, but I feel like we ultimately did. And I think that's a takeaway I'm going to take into the next theory project I work on as well.
Great advice, thanks. Alessandro.
First of all, I subscribe to the points that to both points made, right? So the importance of the team and the importance of sort of developing nuance over time. Now, this is my first theory paper. I hope it will not be the last. And so I will not pretend to have mastered the craft. I think what I have learned is, at the end of the day, you are still writing a 35-page manuscript, right? So you have to think about it, as a little orchard that you're tending to, right? Where you know that you have to stay within those confines. And so you don't want to get lost sort of chasing every idea that comes to you, but you got to stay focused and motivated. And most of all, being aware that it takes time. So as Patrick said, even within those relatively narrow confines, it's actually fairly tough to say something that is not obvious or just a rehashing of previous literature, right? So giving the paper, I think, enough time to mature and, being patient and trying to sort of read broadly, incorporate multiple perspectives. Those are all things that can help, although I think there is no silver bullet. We got lucky this time. We'll see how next time goes.
Great perspective. I'm glad you got lucky. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the paper. I think it's going to be a paper that others will enjoy reading, enjoy using in doctoral seminars, using as a basis for additional work, whether it be empirical or further theorizing. So if you haven't seen it yet, Getting Away with It or Not, The Social Control of Organizational Deviance. Thank you to the three of you for sharing the background to this paper and just for being willing to be so open, honest, and transparent about what went into it. I think everyone will benefit from that.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.